Have you ever felt a love so deep it felt like it was written in the stars? A bond forged in childhood, meant to last a lifetime. Now imagine that destiny is shattered in a single tragic moment. This is a story about picking up the pieces after unthinkable loss. It's about finding the courage to love again, only to discover that your new beginning is built on a secret so profound it could either destroy everything or heal a family in the most unexpected way imaginable. Prepare yourself for a story of love, grief, and a family twist that will leave you breathless. Ava and Danny were a Havenwood, Pennsylvania institution. In a small Rust Belt town where futures felt pre-written, they were the one story everyone believed in. They met in 4th grade, when Danny, the new kid with a confident smile, sat next to the shy, quiet Ava and defended her from bullies. From that day forward, they were a single unit. They shared secrets in the branches of an old oak tree, did their homework at each other's kitchen tables, and fell in love so naturally it felt as inevitable as the changing seasons. He was the adventurer, dreaming of flying jets and seeing the world. She was the artist, finding beauty in creating things with her hands, content with the quiet life Havenwood offered. After high school, his dreams took him to an aviation program near Philadelphia, while her financial reality kept her at the local community college. The distance was hard, but their parents, friends, and the whole town were already planning the wedding. They were Ava and Danny. It was simply meant to be, or so everyone thought. The old sewing machine hummed under Ava's focused gaze, the needle a silver blur against white satin. Her wedding dress, a creation of her own design, was nearly complete. Sunlight streamed through the small apartment window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It should have been a perfect moment, but a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She'd been calling Danny all morning. His phone went straight to voicemail, each unanswered call amplifying a whisper of dread into a roar. This wasn't like him. Even with the stress of his final exams, he always answered. She glanced at the calendar on the wall. Only 2 weeks left. 2 weeks until she walked down the aisle of Havenwood's little community church. A wave of nausea washed over her. She pushed back from the table, the half-finished dress looking like a beautiful ghost. "Just call me back, Danny," she whispered to the silent phone, her voice trembling. "Please, just let me know you're okay." Her mind flashed back to their high school prom. The gymnasium had been transformed with cheap streamers and a disco ball that scattered flecks of light across the crowded floor. Danny looked impossibly handsome in a rented tuxedo, his tie slightly crooked. He had ignored all the other girls, his eyes only on her in the simple pale blue dress she'd sewn herself. "You know," he'd said, his voice low as they swayed to a slow song. "I've loved you since I was 10 years old. Since you showed me that secret litter of kittens under the bleachers." She had buried her face in his shoulder, the smell of his cologne, and the warmth of his hand on her back, making her feel like the safest person in the world. "It's always going to be you and me, Ava," he had promised. That promise was the bedrock of her entire life. It was the certainty she held on to when the world felt confusing. Now, that certainty was cracking, and the silence on the other end of the line was the sound of the fissure spreading. The day dragged on, each tick of the clock a form of torture. Ava tried to distract herself, organising spools of thread by colour, sweeping the floor, but her heart hammered against her ribs with a frantic, irregular beat. When her phone finally rang, she lunged for it, a sob of relief catching in her throat. But it wasn't Danny's name on the screen. It was his mother's. Her hand shook as she answered. "Mrs. Peterson, is everything all right? I can't get a hold of Danny." There was a choked, guttural sound on the other end of the line, a sound of a mother's soul being ripped apart. "Ava, honey." The words came out as a strangled gasp. "There's been an accident down by the river." Ava's blood ran cold. The world tilted on its axis, the familiar walls of her apartment warping and stretching. What kind of accident? She asked, though she already knew. She knew from the sound of that single, shattered word, accident. The news hit Havenwood like a physical blow. Danny Peterson, their golden boy, Their future pilot was a hero. He had seen a little boy slip from the riverbank and, without a second's hesitation, had jumped into the dangerously swift current. He pushed the child towards the shore, towards safety. But the river had been too strong. It had pulled him under. He had saved a life and lost his own. Ava didn't cry at first. She was hollowed out, a walking shell of a person. She heard the words, saw the pity in everyone's eyes, but her mind refused to process the reality. Danny couldn't be gone. He was in Philadelphia. He was coming home in 2 weeks. They were getting married. The white satin dress hung on its mannequin in the corner of her room, a cruel, silent monument to a future that had just been erased. It mocked her with its purity and its promise of a happiness she would now never know. The funeral was a blur of black clothes, solemn faces, and the scent of too many lilies. The entire town came to pay their respects, to mourn the boy they had all watched grow up. Ava stood beside Danny's parents, a stoic, silent figure in a borrowed black dress. People offered her condolences, patting her arm, and telling her how sorry they were. She simply nodded, her eyes fixed on the polished wood of the casket. This was the box that held her entire life, her past and her future. Inside was the boy who defended her, the teenager who held her hand, the man who promised her forever. When they lowered him into the ground, a single, tearing sob finally escaped her lips. It was a sound of such profound loss that it seemed to make the grey sky weep with her. The first drops of a cold, miserable rain began to fall as the first shovel of dirt hit the casket, sealing her past away forever. A year passed. For Ava, it wasn't a year of healing, but a year of suspended animation. She traded her colourful clothes for a muted palette of grey and black. She worked long hours doing alterations at the local dry cleaners, the repetitive motion of the needle a small comfort. She rarely went out, avoiding the sympathetic stares of the townspeople. Her mother, Laura, tried to coax her out of her grief, but it was a shroud she couldn't seem to shed. Her life became a small, quiet loop. Work, home, sleep, repeat. The world, which had once seemed so full of promise, had shrunk to the size of her small apartment and the 4 walls of the shop. She packed the wedding dress away in a box, tucking it into the back of her closet, burying the dream it represented under a pile of old sweaters. She was only 21, but she felt ancient, as if she had already lived and lost a full lifetime. One crisp autumn afternoon, rushing home from work with her head down, her mind lost in its usual fog of sorrow, she collided head-on with a solid wall of a person. A leather briefcase flew from his grasp, sending a flurry of papers scattering across the leaf-strewn sidewalk. "Oh, my God! I'm so sorry," Ava gasped, dropping to her knees, mortified. "I wasn't looking. I'm so sorry." She began frantically gathering the documents. "Hey, it's okay. No harm done," a calm, warm voice said above her. She looked up and met a pair of kind, dark eyes. The man was handsome, dressed in a sharp suit, and he was smiling down at her, not with annoyance, but with genuine amusement. "I'm Ethan, by the way." He offered a hand to help her up. "I'm the new manager at the hotel on Main Street." His touch was warm and firm, and for the first time in over a year, Ava felt a jolt of something other than grief. It was a tiny, unfamiliar spark. Ava stammered her name, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "I'm Ava. I'm just a seamstress. I really am sorry about your papers." She felt awkward and clumsy, suddenly conscious of her plain clothes and the perpetual sadness she wore like a second skin. "Don't be," Ethan said, his smile lingering. "But you do look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Can I buy you a coffee to make up for my briefcase getting in your way?" The offer was so unexpected, so normal, that it threw her. Going for coffee was what other people did, people who weren't drowning in the past. She started to refuse, to retreat back into her safe, grey world. But something in his open, friendly expression made her pause. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her, without a shadow of pity in their eyes. "Okay," she heard herself say, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. "Okay, coffee would be nice." He found her a few days later, waiting outside the dry cleaners as she locked up for the evening. He was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, their bright colours a stark contrast to the dreary street. "For you," he said simply. "I was hoping you hadn't changed your mind about that coffee." Ava felt a flutter in her chest, a nervous, forgotten sensation. He had actually sought her out. They walked to the small diner on the corner, and to her own astonishment she found herself talking. Not just polite conversation, but really talking. She told him about her love for sewing, for creating things. He told her about his nomadic life, moving from city to city for his job, and how he was hoping to finally put down some roots in Havenwood. He was easy to talk to, a good listener who never pushed or pried. For 2 hours she didn't think about Danny once. When he walked her home, she realised she was smiling. It felt like a betrayal and a miracle all at once. Ethan was patient. He moved at her pace, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. Their coffee dates turned into dinners, then long walks in the park. As autumn turned to winter, he slowly, gently coaxed her out of her shell. He made her laugh, a sound she thought she had forgotten how to make. He brought colour back into her world, both literally, with small gifts of brightly coloured scarves, and figuratively with his unyielding optimism. Her mother, Laura, was overjoyed. "He's a good man, Ava," she said one evening, after Ethan had dropped her off. "I can see the light coming back into your eyes." Ava knew it was true. The heavy shroud of grief was beginning to lift, replaced by a tentative, fragile hope. She was falling for Ethan, and the realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. It felt like learning to breathe again, after holding her breath for an impossibly long time. Their relationship deepened over the next few months. He was kind, dependable, and he loved her with a quiet intensity that made her feel cherished. He knew about Danny, of course. She had told him the whole story one night, tears streaming down her face, and he had simply held her, letting her pour out a year's worth of pain without judgment. He never made her feel like she was broken, or that he was a replacement. He was building something new with her, on fresh ground. Soon, talk of the future began to surface. They dreamed of a life together, a real partnership. The idea of marriage, once a source of unbearable pain, no longer seemed impossible. It seemed like a natural, beautiful next step. For the first time since that horrible day, Ava allowed herself to believe she could be happy again. She believed she deserved it. One Sunday, while looking through an old photo album, Ava came across a picture of her grandmother's farmhouse, a charming but neglected property just outside of town that had sat empty for years. An idea sparked. "Ethan," she said excitedly, "what if we fixed this place up? We could make it our own. There's so much space, a big yard." Ethan looked at the photo, his expression unreadable. "It's a lot of work, Ava." "I know, but we could do it together," she insisted, her imagination already running wild with paint colours and garden plans. She handed him the old tarnished key. "Go take a look tomorrow, see what you think." He took the key, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sure," he said, his voice a little too casual. "I'll check it out." It was the first time she had ever felt a flicker of distance between them, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. That's when things began to change. Ethan became evasive. He started working late, coming home exhausted and withdrawn. When she asked about the farmhouse, he would give vague answers. "It needs a lot of work. I'm just assessing things." He started spending whole Saturdays out there, but when he came back, he smelled of antiseptic soap, not sawdust and old wood. He seemed nervous, jumpy, constantly checking his phone. The easy intimacy they had shared began to fray at the edges, replaced by a strange, humming tension. Ava's mind, which had finally found peace, began to race with old insecurities. Was he having second thoughts? Was she too much baggage? Or was it something else entirely? The fear she thought she had buried began to creep back into her life, cold and unwelcome. One evening, he cancelled their dinner plans via a short, cryptic text. "Something came up at work. Can't make it. Sorry." It was the third time that week. Ava felt a sick, familiar dread coil in her gut. Doubt, ugly and venomous, whispered in her ear. He wasn't at work. He was with someone else. The thought was a physical pain, a sharp stab to her heart. Why else would he be so secretive? Why the sudden distance? The image of him with another woman, a woman who wasn't shadowed by grief, a woman who was whole and uncomplicated, burned in her mind. She thought of the farmhouse, the supposed project that kept him so busy. The lie was so obvious now. He wasn't fixing it up for them. He was using it as a cover. The trust she had so carefully rebuilt crumbled into dust. Tears of anger and betrayal streamed down her face. Why is this happening again? She sobbed to her empty apartment. It felt like a curse. Every time she reached for happiness, it was snatched away. First Danny, now this. The man who was supposed to be her healer was just inflicting a new kind of wound. He was a liar. And she refused to be a fool. She would not sit here and wait for him to come home smelling of another woman's perfume. She needed to see it for herself. She needed the proof, no matter how much it would hurt. Grabbing her car keys, her hands shaking with a furious energy, she decided then and there. She was going to the farmhouse. She was going to catch him in the act and end this charade once and for all. A cold, driving rain lashed against her windshield as she drove the dark country road to her grandmother's property. Each drop felt like a tiny accusation. The farmhouse stood silhouetted against the stormy sky, a single dim light glowing from a downstairs window. His car was parked out front. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of rage and despair. He was here. He was in their future home with someone else. She parked her car down the road and walked the rest of the way, the mud sucking at her shoes. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she didn't bother knocking. She used her own key, turned the lock, and threw the door open with a crash, ready to scream, to cry, to confront the man who had broken her heart. The house smelled not of perfume, but of dust, decay, and something medicinal. The living room was empty, covered in drop cloths, and then Ethan emerged from the back bedroom, his face pale with shock. "Ava! What are you doing here?" he stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "What am I doing here?" she shot back, her voice dripping with venom. "I think the real question is, what are you doing here, Ethan? And who is she? Don't bother lying. I want to see her." She pushed past him, her body trembling with adrenaline, and stormed into the bedroom. She braced herself to see another woman, a scene of betrayal. But the reality was something she could have never, in a million years, imagined. Lying on a makeshift bed was a man, an old, frail man, his skin waxy and pale, his breathing shallow and ragged. His face and hands were covered in angry red burns. Ava froze, the anger draining out of her, replaced by utter confusion. The man on the bed moaned softly. "Ethan! Who is this?" she whispered, turning to face him. He looked completely defeated, his shoulders slumped. "Ava, I'm so sorry. I should have told you," he began, his voice cracking. This is my father. His name is Stephen." The words hung in the air, making no sense. "Your father? But you told me your parents died years ago." "I thought they had," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I thought he was dead. He just got out of prison. He found me a few weeks ago outside the hotel. He's sick, Ava. He's homeless. He had nowhere else to go. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to tell you. I thought you'd be ashamed of me, of him. I didn't want to bring this into your life." Ava stared from Ethan's anguished face to the sick man on the bed, and her heart, which had been hardened with suspicion, broke open with a wave of overwhelming compassion. All his lies, his distance, his secrecy, it wasn't about another woman. It was about this. He was protecting her, or so he thought. He was hiding his own pain, his own shame, trying to carry this impossible burden alone. She saw not a liar, but a good man trying to do the right thing in a terrible situation. She walked over to Ethan and took his hand. "You should have told me," she said softly, but without an ounce of anger. "We're a team, remember? You don't have to do this alone." Relief washed over his face, so profound that it brought tears to his eyes. "I love you, Ava," he whispered. "I was so scared of losing you." In that moment, all doubt vanished. This was the man she loved, a man who, despite his own fear, would not abandon his father in his darkest hour. "We're not losing each other," she said, her voice firm. "We're going to take care of him. Together." She looked at the frail figure on the bed. "He can't stay here like this. It's cold and damp." She took a deep breath, a plan forming in her mind. "We're moving in. Right now. We'll bring blankets, food, a space heater. We'll make one room livable. Your father needs care, Ethan, and we're going to give it to him." Ethan stared at her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had walked in expecting to find a cheater, and was instead offering to become a caregiver for a sick ex-convict stranger. His love for her deepened into something unshakable. He knew without a doubt that he had found the most incredible woman in the world. The next few weeks were a blur of hard work and shared purpose. They turned the dusty farmhouse into a sanctuary. Ava and Ethan worked as a seamless team, their bond stronger than ever. She used her skills to mend old quilts and curtains, while he tackled the bigger repairs. Day by day, under their care, Stephen began to recover. The colour returned to his cheeks, and the light of awareness returned to his eyes. He was quiet at first, ashamed and overwhelmed by the kindness. One evening, as the three of them sat around the small kitchen table, he finally found the strength to speak. "I need to tell you everything," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "You deserve to know who you've let into your home." And so, the story of his life, a story of ambition, betrayal, and ruin, began to unfold. Stephen had been a successful man once. He'd built a small restaurant empire from a single hot dog stand. He had everything but a family. Then he met Jenna, a woman half his age, whose beauty hid a core of selfishness. He fell hard, ignoring all the warnings from his friends. They married, but she was a wife in name only, interested only in his money. His deepest desire was to be a father, but he learned he was sterile. The news devastated him. When he proposed adoption, Jenna refused. "I'm not raising someone else's kid," she'd sneered. But Stephen was determined. He went to a local orphanage, and that's where he met a bright, lonely little boy who ran up to him and asked, "Are you here to be my dad?" That boy was Ethan. He adopted him on his own, and for 5 years they were happy. Ethan was the light of his life. His wife, Jenna, despised Ethan and started an affair with Stephen's business partner and best friend, Art. Together, they plotted against him. Art tricked Stephen into signing fraudulent documents, bankrupting him and stealing his entire business. Jenna left him the same day. Consumed by rage and a thirst for revenge, Stephen confronted Art in a parking lot. A brutal fight ensued, and in his fury, Stephen went too far. Art died, and Stephen was sent to prison for manslaughter. Ethan was returned to the foster care system. "I failed you, son," Stephen said, his voice thick with regret. "I took you in, promised you a life, and I threw it all away." After his release, he couldn't adjust. He fell into drinking, homelessness, and another short prison stint. The burns were from a cruel prank by some kids while he was passed out. He had sought Ethan out only to ask for forgiveness before he died. Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "Dad, I never hated you," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I missed you. I was angry that you were gone, but I was never angry at you. Those 5 years with you were the only time in my childhood I ever felt like I had a real family." Ava reached across the table and placed her hand on Stephen's. "You have a real family now," she said gently. "This is your home." Later that night, as she and Ethan lay in bed, she snuggled close to him. "I have something to tell you too," she whispered, a nervous smile playing on her lips. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "It seems your dad is going to be a grandfather." Ethan's eyes widened, and then a joyous, incredulous laugh escaped him. In the midst of all this pain and healing, a new life, a new hope was beginning. With the baby on the way, they decided not to postpone the wedding. They wanted to be a family, officially, in every sense of the word. The only thing left was to introduce their remaining parents. Ava was nervous as she prepped the farmhouse for her mother's visit. Stephen was also on edge, freshly shaved, and wearing a new shirt they'd bought him. What if she hates me? He worried, pacing the floor. She'll love you, Ava reassured him. My mum has a big heart. Laura arrived, carrying a casserole, and beaming with excitement to finally meet the man who had made her daughter so happy. She walked into the kitchen, her smile warm. It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Stephen. I'm Laura, she said, extending her hand. Stephen turned from the stove to face her. A pleasure to meet you, Laura. His voice trailed off. The colour drained from his face. Laura's hand dropped to her side. The casserole dish slipped from her other hand, shattering on the floor, in a mess of noodles and cream sauce. Her face was a mask of pure shock. Stevie, she whispered, the name a ghost from a long-dead past. She took a staggering step back, her hand flying to her chest, and her eyes rolled back in her head as she collapsed in a dead faint. Ava screamed, rushing to her mother's side. Ethan, completely bewildered, ran for a glass of water. Stephen stood frozen, pale as a sheet, staring down at the unconscious woman on his floor as if he'd just seen an apparition. Lolly, he breathed, a nickname no one had heard in over 2 decades. The past, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. It had just walked through the front door and fainted on the kitchen floor. After they revived Laura with a cool cloth and sat her in a chair, the story came tumbling out, a torrent of secrets held for 22 years. She and Stevie had been high school sweethearts, a passionate, fiery first love. But he was wild and she was proud. A bitter, jealous fight had torn them apart. Humiliated, she had left Havenwood without a word, only to discover, weeks later, that she was pregnant. She had never told him. She was determined to raise her child on her own, to never be dependent on the boy who broke her heart. She returned to Havenwood years later, telling everyone her husband had died. That child was Ava. Ava stared speechless from her mother's tear-streaked face to Stephen's stunned one. The sick, homeless ex-convict that she and her fiancé had rescued was not just his father. He was her father too. The revelation was staggering, the odds of it astronomical. The man Ava was about to marry was the adopted son of her own biological father. They weren't related by blood, but their lives were tangled together in a knot of fate that was almost too incredible to comprehend. For a moment the room was silent, thick with the weight of this new reality. Then Stephen spoke, his voice hoarse. I have a daughter, he said, looking at Ava with a lifetime of regret and wonder in his eyes. I have a daughter. Instead of being horrified, Ava felt a strange sense of clicking into place. The inexplicable pull she had felt to care for this broken man, the deep, familial compassion. It all made sense now. She went to him and wrapped her arms around him. Hi, Dad, she whispered. And for the first time, Stephen cried tears not of sorrow, but of impossible, unbelievable joy. Their wedding was a small, beautiful affair held in the backyard of the newly repaired farmhouse. It was a celebration not just of a marriage, but of the bizarre, miraculous creation of a family. Stephen, looking healthier and happier than he had in decades, walked Ava down the aisle and then stood beside Ethan as his best man. Laura, her eyes shining, watched as her daughter married the son of her first love. During the reception, as Ava and Ethan danced, she noticed her mother and father sitting on the porch swing, talking quietly, a shy, tentative smile on both their faces. An old, forgotten love was being rekindled. It was a strange, complicated, messy, and absolutely perfect family. And it was hers. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her soul that everything had happened exactly as it was meant to. A few months later, heavily pregnant, Ava was at the clinic for a checkup when she saw a familiar face in the waiting room. Danny's mother. A pang of guilt and sadness shot through her. She had been so caught up in her new life. She was afraid this woman would see her happiness as a betrayal of her son's memory. But Mrs. Peterson smiled, a gentle, sad smile. Ava, I heard you got married, and I see a little one is on the way. She reached out and touched Ava's belly. I'm so happy for you, dear. Danny would have wanted you to be happy. Tears welled in Ava's eyes. I miss him every day. I know, the woman said softly, but life goes on. I only ask one thing. If it's a boy, would you consider naming him Daniel, so a part of my boy can live on? Ava hugged her tightly. Of course, she promised. His name will be Daniel. The final scene is one of quiet, domestic bliss. Ava sits in a rocking chair in the farmhouse, nursing her newborn son, Daniel Ethan. Through the window, she can see Ethan and Stephen working together in the garden, their shoulders occasionally bumping, laughing at some shared joke. Her mother, Laura, comes out onto the porch with a tray of lemonade, a genuine, easy smile on her face as she watches Stephen. A family, forged in tragedy and secrets, was now whole. Ava had lost her first love, the boy who was her entire world, but in that loss she found a new love, a lost father, and a strength she never knew she possessed. She finally understood that sometimes the most beautiful futures are the ones we could never have planned. She had found her way home. Thank you for watching this incredible story. If it touched your heart, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next one. What do you think is the most important element for a strong family? Blood, love, or forgiveness? Share your thoughts in the comments below.